The big news for today was supposed to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers veterans reporting to training camp. However, we're talking about Vita Vea after his trade request. And yeah, in case you missed it, last night Vita Vea requested a trade from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because he's currently unhappy with his contract. So A, will the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trade him? And B, what could they get for him if they decide to do that? I'm Evan Winter with A to Z Sports. Let's break it all down. So yeah, Vea requested a trade last night, and we knew he was unhappy with his deal because of his mandatory minicamp hold-in. However, I don't think anybody really foresaw this happening. And while, yeah, this is mostly a strategical move by him and his agent, just to get feelers out there or make some waves, really show the Buccaneers that they're serious about wanting to get a new deal done. It's still tangible when it comes to just what happens next, and it's worthy of the conversation. So we'll get to the talk of whether or not the Buccaneers trade Vea here in a little bit. But first, let's kind of try to figure out what the Buccaneers could actually get, because that will ultimately steer the decision-making in this whole process. And we need to get those facts laid out first, right? So usually when it comes to navigating these conversations, what a player is worth, what a team is willing to let go, it's always best to look at history. And while history is not always exactly a perfect comp, it does give us a good pathway to figuring all this out. And so you don't want to go too far back, right? Like trades today are a lot different than they were 10 years ago. And that's due to salary cap, even the increase or decrease of certain, draft pick value, and then also positional group value, whether it's increase or decrease for certain positions. Like, for instance, we know just all the ups and downs the running back group has gone through over the last 10 to 15 years, things of that nature. So I decided to go back in the last 5 years and kind of take a look at all the interior defensive lineman trades. And I found 3 good examples that, again, will help us kind of steer this ship as we try to get to our final destination. And so we're going to start with most relevant and kind of work back. And the number one, I think, example that everybody's going to kind of point to is the Dexter Lawrence trade. Sexy Dexy to the Bengals for the 10th overall pick in this year's draft. And they gave him a big raise afterward. So, yeah, that seems fair, right? Vita Vea is still playing at a high level. And Dexter Lawrence was coming off the worst year of his career, yet he received that kind of bounty whenever he was traded. There's some big differences here, though, between Dexter Lawrence and Vita Vea. And look, you hate to always put a bunch of weight in one category when it comes to talking NFL, because there are just so many different factors that go into everything. But a lot of times, the number one thing teams, GMs, whoever look at is age. And it's just that simple, because is a player going to get better as they get older, or are they going to get worse as they get older? That's just part of the nature of the cycle, right? So Dexter Lawrence, when he was traded, 28 years old, still 28 years old, won't turn 29 until November. So that means the Bengals are going to get him for about half of his age 28 season, all of his age 29 season, all of his age 30 season. You kind of get where I'm going with this. Vita Vea is 31. He's going to be 32 next year whenever a new deal comes up, or he's entering the first year of a new deal that he's received, if that happens. So that means the Bengals are going to have Dexter Lawrence for about 2.5 years under contract before he even hits the age of 31. That's a big deal. And that's something that teams are going to look at, and that trajectory is super important. And then also, look, you got to look at it this way too. Dexter Lawrence has 3 Pro Bowls, 2 second-team All-Pros under his belt. Vita Vea has 2 Pro Bowls. And Vita Vea, let's just be real, also has an injury history. Now, while I think that injury history is very overblown over the last 3 to 4 seasons, I mean, the most games he's missed in a single season since his 2020 injury, where he missed 11 of 16 games, but came back for the playoffs, the most games he's missed in a single season is 3. But he has missed time here and there. However, he is coming off a fully healthy season last year where he played all 17 games. Still, teams are going to look at that. That cloud does hang over his head. And Dexter Lawrence has had nowhere near that injury history himself. So while people may think it's fair to look at that and say, oh, yeah, the Buccaneers should easily get a first-round pick for Vita Vea, I don't think it's that simple. And while there are some similarities, not enough for that to carry weight. The next example I found was Osa Odighizuwa to the San Francisco 49ers for a 3rd-round pick, the 92nd pick overall in this year's past draft as well. So Osa is 27 years old, younger than Dexter Lawrence. He's actually going to make more money next year and in 2028 than Vita Vea, because obviously Vita Vea is not under contract the next 2 years, but still, Osa is going to make $20 million per year in cash base salary. And that's more in a single season in terms of just base salary than Vita Vea has ever made. So not only is he younger, but he's more expensive, less sack production, but he's still a really good run defender. It's not like, pass rush is his ultimate game. And so the key here again with this is Osa has missed one game throughout his entire 4-year career in the NFL. I mean, again, teams look at that kind of stuff. Like there's no injury history there whatsoever. And then he was also set to make right around $17 million in cash this year, but he reconverted that into like a $14 million and change restructure that brought his base salary down. But still, he was set to make right around the same as Vita Vea, a little bit less this year, but more next year. So with that comparison, again, there are just little things that really undermine what Vita Vea is trying to do this year in terms of getting a new deal. And again, he's got to look at it as he's going to be 32 next year. He's definitely on the back end of his career, and he plays a position that is very susceptible to injury. And it's a position where he's not going to be on the field for more than 65% of the time at most. So going back to Yaya Diaby and Cody Mauch, would you rather invest in players who are going to be on the field more just in general? Cody Mauch's going to play 100% of snaps if he's healthy on offense, and as well as, developing players with a higher ceiling, or are you going to sink a bunch of money, into an aging guy who, while still playing at a high level, the math just doesn't math ultimately. And then this is probably the best comp that I could find and kind of the most accurate. And that was 2023 when Leonard Williams was traded for a second-round pick in 2024 and then a fifth-round pick in 2025. So that's kind of where the sweet spot lies in my mind. Leonard Williams at the time of his trade was 29 years old, so older than Dexter Lawrence and older than Osa. He had 39 and a half sacks at that point in his career. Vita Vea currently has 35. And he was coming off of a 2.5 sack season in 2022, where he also missed 5 games. Yet the Giants were still able to ship him to the Seahawks for that, second rounder and future fifth rounder. This is where it gets interesting because Leonard Williams at the time was in the midst of a 3-year, $63 million contract extension he signed with the Giants, so making well over $20 million per year, and he still netted that kind of gain. Now, Leonard Williams, the dude was just voted in the ESPN positional rankings, that came out over the last few weeks. He was just voted as the number 1 defensive lineman in the league. So the dude is an elite player, and that takes to factor into consideration, as well as a guy like Quinnen Williams, who demanded a first-round pick from the Cowboys after the Jets traded him within the last couple seasons as well. So we're talking about a different echelon of player here than Vita Vea. Vita Vea is a very, very good player. I would not consider him elite, however, and there's a big gap between elite and very good. That's why Leonard Williams received what he received, or garnered what was sent out. And yeah, at this point, it's just a match of career, resume, traits, production, impact. So Leonard Williams is just a step above Vita Vea. It's that simple. However, I do think when you're just looking at it from a numbers standpoint and a health standpoint and then accolades, Leonard Williams at the time had, 1 Pro Bowl. It does kind of make sense, this formula right here. So with all that being said, will the Buccaneers trade Vita Vea? I'm going to say no. It would not make sense for them to trade Vita Vea. If they do, I see them netting a 3rd-round pick in the back end of the draft. Now, obviously, the draft order is not set up right now. So, like, if a team like the Browns were to give a 3rd-rounder, that could easily be a 3rd in the top 5 of the draft next year, right? I mean, I'm talking about, like, a top 5 pick in the 3rd round is what I'm trying to say. Whereas if the Rams traded for him, that's likely going to be a back-end pick in the 3rd round. So we don't really know what that is going to be based on a team-to-team basis. However, still, in an ideal world, he would be a back-end 3rd-round pick, in my opinion. That would be his value. But even that would be a hard sell. I think most likely a 4th-rounder. And then if they want to add a player or maybe do a 2027 draft pick, or sorry, a 2028 draft pick, that's more on the table. However, I don't think the Buccaneers even entertain any of that because looking at their roster, if they trade Vita Vea, this defense is going to be in trouble because they just simply don't have anybody to take his place. And he is the anchor of this defensive front seven. I mean, there's no doubt about that. A'Shawn Robinson should be a good player, but he's a complimentary guy, right? He is not the guy, and that's with all due respect to A'Shawn Robinson. Kalijah Cansey could be a stalwart on the defensive line, but his health is just too much in question. We don't know if he's going to stay healthy. Neither do the Buccaneers. And then do you really expect DeMonte Capehart to step in and have a Vita Vea impact in year one of his, first NFL season? Not happening. And then Nacho's great, but Nacho, Elijah Roberts, Elijah Simmons, and the other depth guys, they don't even come close to what Vita Vea can do for this defense. So the Buccaneers, understanding that they're going to get a late day 2 pick, or most likely a day 3 pick, 4th rounder. And here's the trick with that too, is if Vita Vea does walk after this season, which it looks like he's going to, and the Buccaneers played the comp pick game correctly, they could probably net a 4th rounder in a compensatory pick for the loss of Vita Vea to begin with. So why not just keep him around, hope that he plays his butt off in terms of hoping to get a new deal, and then boom, you get your comp pick, which is exactly what you would have received for him if you traded him anyways. So there's all that to consider as well. So ultimately, I do not think the Buccaneers trade Vita Vea. The best solution to all this, and we've talked about this on here before, would be to just give him a sizable raise. A raise of $4 to $5 million, somewhere in that range, would get Vita Vea into the top 10 of interior defensive lineman rankings when it comes to cash. And then you can also add like $1 million or $2 million in incentives that were, like playing time, sack numbers, reasonable incentives that he could attain that could push him even higher up that list. I don't really fully understand why the Buccaneers wouldn't do that this year. They have the cap space to do it, and they could just do a couple minor alterations to some contracts in order to make it happen. But regardless, that's between them and Vita Vea. So, yeah, we're just going to have to, wait until the news comes out, if any news ever comes out, on why that did or didn't happen. So regardless, tell me what you think. I mean, do you think the Buccaneers should trade Vita Vea? What do you think they should get in return if they do that? Let me know in the comments, and we'll talk about it.